maximizing the benefits and minimizing any adverse consequences from those. Many of you know about H-GAC, so I'm not going to say a lot about this, but in MAP-21 and in previous bills, our Transportation Policy Council, which is really the decision-making group for the MPO, has to prepare a long-range transportation plan that says what kind of community are we trying to build and how does transportation support achieving that vision. And that's our regional transportation plan. But simply having a long-range plan isn't enough. It doesn't tell us exactly what or where we need to do things. So we have an ongoing program of planning and public engagement. And then as we are looking at making the investment decisions on a regular basis, we need to prioritize our short-term state and federal transportation funding and making sure that that money complements and coordinates the local transportation investment that's occurring. Something around 70% of all the dollars spent on transportation start and right here in the region. They come from your local property taxes and are spent by your cities or your counties. They come from the toll road authorities that are owned by county governments in our region. They come from the Metropolitan Transit Authority sales tax. They come from special districts that have been created by some of our communities. And then another important responsibility of our MPO is to make sure that we, through our actions on transportation, are supporting key air quality goals in our region. I just want to say a little bit about who the heck this MPO thing is. It's really locally oriented. It's your local elected officials, and I say appointed officials, because we include major modes of transportation. So, for example, the Chief Executive Officer of the Metropolitan Transit Authority is one of the voting members on our MPO. We have a representative from the ports of our region on our MPO committee. And then state transportation officials, we have 2 different districts of our state DOT. Both of them are represented. They're supported by various advisory and technical committees. Some of you here serve on our technical advisory committee or one of its many subcommittees, and of course the MPO staff. But really, engagement with the regional community is critical, and you heard an excellent presentation from Jeff Table about some of the activities that we are doing now. I left this slide in here because I don't want anyone to misunderstand what we mean by this. Public involvement is an added value process. You know, it's like that extra man when the certain football team or basketball teams talk about the extra man on the field. That's what the public is for us. They make sure that we're not missing the obvious, that we understand sometimes the complexity of a transportation issue, that we understand the impacts of it, and as a consequence, the products, the projects that we develop better meet the needs of the community. I'm going to go ahead here just a little bit. It's really important in the process, I think, of trying to achieve a more equitable transportation system to have effective public engagement. Why? Because if someone cannot participate, then how do we know that we are addressing or not their needs or what problems we may be creating inadvertently for that part of our community? We're trying here at the MPO to do some new things. We're always trying to find better ways to communicate because we're a very small organization in a very large community. That means more than just speaking in plain English. It means speaking in plain Spanish and plain several other languages. And you saw some of that again in Jeff's presentation of the survey that he was doing. We need to make sure that we are talking in a way, though, that gets beyond engineering terms, technical terms, use pictures, and other kinds of things that help people understand what we are discussing. The other part I've learned is that although actions when they happen seem very sudden, quite frankly, the planning work and the development of transportation projects can take a very long time. As a consequence, this dialogue, this public involvement process has to be a continuing activity. We have frequently learned to our dismay that things that we discussed only 10 years ago, suddenly there's a whole new group of people who are living and working in an area where we had that public engagement. So now we're trying to make sure that when we do transportation planning, we're thinking through how that gets sustained. Sometimes that may be to create groups of new participants in transportation planning, advocacy groups if you want to call them that, but someone who can continue to help make sure that the plan is alive and relevant to that community, and it changes if it needs to. This is a quick look at our H-GAC website. Many of you are familiar with that as well. One of the other things that we're trying to do is engage more in various forms of media, including trying to do some longer television shows so we can sit down and talk at length with key actors about projects and what they mean and how they're going to work and how they might affect the community, provide more ways to get feedback, and to do this through things that don't necessarily replace public meetings like this one, but also give people the opportunity to participate from home. We are a large region, and just the other night it took me 2 hours to get to a public meeting up in Magnolia, and yet we think nothing about asking folks from Magnolia to come to H-GAC for public meetings. So it works both ways. I want to speak very briefly to some of the things that you heard about from our previous speaker. It was an excellent summary of some key points of MAP-21. And right now in the development of our regional transportation plan, we're looking carefully at the ideas about performance measures. But before you get to performance measures, remember you really have got to start with goals and outcomes. What is it we want to do? What is it we want to achieve? And then how are we going to measure those things? Quite frankly, I'll be real interested in what the federal government has to say and what the state government has to say, and we'll pay attention to those. But if those aren't particularly relevant to what our community says we want to do, they'll just be on the list. I mean, I want to make sure that our performance measures reflect the things that we feel contribute to our community the most. So I thought there was a great example about the travel time index. Quite frankly, knowing Dr. Lomax, who helped develop that at Texas A&M, he's kind of moved on too. He's looking at other kinds of measures of transportation accessibility and reliability that can be more important. For most folks, reliability is actually more important than the overall travel time. Why? Because you can plan for it. But if you're going to be able to get to work one day and it takes you 25 minutes, the next day it takes you 45 minutes, the next day an hour and 15 minutes, you've got a babysitter on the other end, or you've got daycare arrangements, or you've got other kinds of things you're doing, that can make your life very, very difficult and sometimes expensive. I also wanted to say that our area is changing in ways you might not have thought about or expected. For example, how many folks think that we travel, on average, a greater distance today, and say vehicle miles traveled, than we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago? I mean, no, most people don't think we're traveling further? Okay. Most people think we're traveling less? Well, there's not too many people on the less side. The fact is that we travel fewer vehicle miles per person today than we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And you might think, well, why is that? I can think of a number of reasons why it may be. Could be a response to congestion. In other words, you're looking for a nearer place to go because it takes you longer to get somewhere. Could be because, though, we're developing into a more urbanized area and a more urbanized state. So perhaps your travel destinations are greater within a less distance. But contrary to what I hear a lot of times, we're not actually driving more miles to get to work or to shop today than we did 10 years ago. Travel time. Travel time really remains one of the more constant factors. We don't see in survey data people spending an increasing amount of time to travel to work. Now, what does that mean? I think that may suggest that we're going to be seeing more opportunity for jobs and communities to be closer together, that it may not be in a downtown Houston or even a Greenway Plaza. It might be in the Woodlands, it might be like the Energy Corridor in West Houston. I think we have to start thinking about what, when we talk about urban and suburban, that's too simple. We're beyond that now. I don't know what to call all the development that we have in what we used to call suburban areas. Why? Because more and more people who live there want to live in a community. They want to live near where they're working, and they're thinking about ways to change that. It's part of the genesis of something we call livable centers that Jeff Table has, again, worked on significantly with his group. But it is not all about simply trying to think of things in linear distances from the center of downtown. Now that creates new challenges about how we're going to meet those transportation needs and do it in a sustainable way. And I think you heard some of that from David when he was talking about ways in which we could link major employment center areas and have a bigger market capture on travel. One of the things we, I think, have not done enough of in the transit world is to think about how we are going to provide greater access to the different employment areas outside of downtown Texas Medical Center and one or two others. And David has provided input on that in the past. I hope that in the future we'll see some return thinking about how we can create those opportunities and achieve them. A few other things that we haven't talked about today as much is transportation funding. And I want to highlight that. You did hear from the speaker just before me that the transportation funding is basically flat. But that's only because Congress was willing to essentially put additional resources into the bucket. I assume most of you know for a long time now the funds collected based upon gas tax revenue have not supported the level of expenditure nationally on transportation. And we expect that to continue to decline. In the state of Texas, it has declined less only because we've had so much increase in population growth. In other parts of the country, it's declined much more. And with increasing motor vehicle fuel economy and the use of alternative fuels, I think we're going to see that continue to grow. One thing I think will be a significant debate in the near future, more than any of the changes that we've seen in MAP-21, is how are we going to achieve a sustainable investment in transportation. And that's going to cause us to think about, why are we spending this money? What is the national purpose in what we're doing? What does it achieve at state and local levels? And I hope that you'll be a participant in that discussion, because that'll probably determine whether I retire in 5 or 6 years, or I maybe can stretch that out a little bit more when I can actually afford to retire. But I want to thank you for letting me give you a few comments, and I'm looking very much forward to the panel that we'll have in just a few moments. Now, David, do you want to explain what we want to do for break? Or are you just going to ask people to stay?